Who here has a problem with the idea of God being angry? All right, well, Logan has a problem with God being angry. And guess what? So do a lot of Americans. You know, God is love. God doesn't get angry. The wrath of God? I mean, how primitive. You really believe that? Yeah, I sure do believe that. You know why? Because I promise you that if one of you kidnaps one of my little granddaughters, I'm going to be real angry. And guess what? If I'm not angry, my granddaughter doesn't matter to me. Not with a selfish anger, but with a righteous indignation. Is God angry? Yes, he is. Not with a selfish anger. Oh, you've offended me. Oh, you rained on my party. No, none of that. With a righteous indignation of how we dehumanize each other, that's sin. Racism is dehumanizing. Sexism is dehumanizing. Sexually exploiting someone is dehumanizing. She's not a Barbie doll. She's a human being created in the image of God. Don't use her sexually. Greed, dehumanizing. Your money's more important than you are. I want your money. Coveting, dehumanizing. And so God is angry because we dehumanize each other, and God has created us not to dehumanize each other, but to respect each other, to love each other.
So when you visit campuses, is that the most common sticking point, that the path is too narrow? If you had to really bring it down, what is the limiting current belief of Gen Z when confronted with the truth that prevents them from accepting Jesus? What would that be?
Yeah, moral relativism, for sure. And this white, Western adopted philosophy, which is all religions are true, and how dare you say that you have the right religion. So they will say, look at the elephant, look at all paths lead up to the mountaintop. So all religions are just grabbing. One's grabbing the ear, one's grabbing the foot of the elephant, one's grabbing the trunk. And see, you guys are all just grabbing part of God. And yet what they don't get is, well, those people are blind, so they don't realize they're grabbing parts of the elephant. Well, okay, then someone has tremendous vigilance and spiritual superiority to say, I'm the one who's not blind. And I see Charlie grabbing the trunk, so he's Buddhist. I see Cliffe grabbing the foot, so he's Hindu. So you guys are all idiots. All gods are the same. Well, what you don't realize is you are not only spiritually elitist, but you are also rejecting the exclusive truth claims of 95% of the world. So that's one of the biggest challenges.
Would you agree with that? Is that the core objection you receive?
A part of moral relativism claims that there is no such thing as truth. But when somebody says and makes a statement like that, you got to ask them, is that true? Because that's a statement of truth right there that they just said. Now, there is objective truth and objective reality. And speaking about this parable, listen to what Frank Turek has to say in response to this parable of the elephant in the room and the blind man and his, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. He says this: these blind men are said to represent world religions because they each come to a different conclusion about what they are sensing. Like each blind man, we are told no one religion has the truth. Religious truth is relative to the individual. It is subjective, not objective. This may seem persuasive until you ask yourself one question. What's the perspective of the one telling the parable? Let's see. The one telling the parable, he appears to have an objective perspective of the entire proceeding because he can see that the blind men are mistaken. Exactly. In fact, he wouldn't know that the blind men were wrong unless he had an objective perspective of what was right. So if the person telling the parable can have an objective perspective, why can't the blind men? They could if the blind men suddenly could see. They too would realize that they were originally mistaken. That's really an elephant in front of them and not a wall, a fan, or a rope. We too can see the truth in religion. Unfortunately, many of us who deny there's truth in religion are not actually blind, but only willingly blind.
One's grabbing the foot of the elephant, one's grabbing the trunk. And see, you guys are all just grabbing part of God. And yet what they don't get is, well, those people are blind, so they don't realize they're grabbing parts of the elephant. Well, okay, then someone has tremendous vigilance and spiritual superiority to say, I'm the one who's not blind. And I see Charlie grabbing the trunk, so he's Buddhist. I see Cliffe grabbing the foot, so he's Hindu. So you guys are all idiots. All gods are the same. Well, what you don't realize is you are not only spiritually elitist, but you are also rejecting the exclusive truth claims of 95% of the world. So that's one of the biggest challenges.
Would you agree with that? Is that the core objection you receive?
Yeah, and now let's be real honest. I think it really comes down to I want to sleep with whoever I want to sleep with.
Well, that's a separate issue, though. Meaning that they won't believe it if it's true. That's Frank Turek's line. Would you believe Christianity if it was true?
Right.
And most people would not, because it would change their life.
Correct. And so therefore, the reason I reject Christ is for a moral reason, and then I hide behind the intellectual reason. But if you push comes to shove, I mean, my younger brother went to Princeton University, and at Princeton, he used to share Christ with his roommates late into the night. Around about midnight, he'd turn to his Princeton classmates and say, guys, if you're just going to ask these questions, we'll pull an all-nighter if this is honest. But if the real issue is, I want to sleep around and I want to cheat on my next exam because the pressure to get into med school is intense, then let's be honest. And every single time his Princeton classmates would say, Stuart, you're correct. This is not an intellectual problem. It's a moral issue.
Of course, yeah.
And he would say, guys, wait, we don't have to pull an all-nighter. Good night. Have a good night's sleep.
So then, how then do you overcome that, if at all?
I think for me, it's getting rather simple. The older I get. You know, morality is relative, which means the guy who took a whack at President Trump and killed another guy, it's all relative. That's his definition of truth. And the trade traffic, well, you know, it's all relative. So if you're upset about it, fine, but I kind of enjoy it. And truth is relative. You know something? You can't live that out. Because even when you were a little kid, if your sibling got more ice cream in their ice cream bowl than you did in your ice cream bowl, what would you say? Oh, that's cool? No, you'd say, that's not fair. And if you're married and your spouse takes a whack at you, you don't say, oh, that felt good, honey, why don't you do that again? No, you say, you should not do that. You ought not to do that. It is impossible to live out moral relativism. Doesn't work.
Do you find that to be persuasive to the students you talk to?
I take a different route. That's probably the better route. I take the route, though, of, look, statistically, 2 guys from Yale wrote this book, Premarital Sex in America, and promiscuity is directly correlated with serious mental health problems, especially for women. Men, for some reason, are able to cut off their emotions sexually from the physical side and just live out their physical well-being of shagging any woman they possibly can. But there's clear breakdown as well, these Yale authors are writing, showing that there's a drastic increase in divorce if you're sleeping around as well. But again, you can go there,
Yeah.
but the best answer is making Christ more attractive than just, I'm going to shag the next thing or person with a pulse that I possibly can. And if Jesus is more attractive in the way where he says, I love you unconditionally, no matter your failings, I offer you grace. You know, it's the whole idea of your job can't die for you. Your job, if you find your identity in it, you're going to be ultimately crushed. If you find your identity in your wife, you're going to be ultimately crushed. It's St. Augustine's ordered loves. If you put God at the top, you will live a life of incredible flourishing. So that's kind of where I go.
Yeah, and I want to get to some questions here in a second. I visit college campuses, as you guys do, and I get the spicier encounters at times. I'm sure you guys get them as well. But what's so fascinating is that I'll come and talk primarily about politics, but as you well know, I always share the gospel whenever it comes up. But inevitably, almost always, if I go and I have a table and what I want to talk about for the day never remains, and it could be about immigration, it could be about that there are no genders and 2 sexes and unlimited personalities, whatever it is. Within minutes, they are asking me, well, are you religious? Because they have been so trained and conditioned because they want to get down into, well, where is this coming from? Because if you're saying something that's true and they think about it, they say, well, do you think there's a God that's telling you this? Because they want a moral license to live as they want to live. But what I found is that almost all of these conversations yield back to some moral standard at some point. And many college students and even college professors will deny the fact that there is a moral standard, but they're living up to some standard at some point. So someone tells them that murder is wrong or murder is evil or theft is wrong. They say, oh, that's just common sense. We just know that. I know that murder is wrong. I understand that. So why are we so many murderers then if everyone knows that it's wrong? So do you guys encounter that as well, that it gets down to the deeper issues rather quickly?
Yes, it definitely gets down to the deeper issues rather quickly when you have the privilege of talking with thinking people. And people have to think. I mean, I'm very grateful that over 290 times in the Gospels, Jesus asks questions. And this whole idea that faith is anti-intellectual, faith is anti-rational, faith is anti-logical, that's a naive, blind faith. And Christ does not call us to a naive, blind faith. Does he call us to something you can prove? No. To prove means to show it cannot be another way. I can't prove, Charlie, that I'm not just a bad dream you're having right now. Maybe your eyesight is flipping out on you and you're having this weird dream of Cliff. So I can't prove it, but the overwhelming evidence is you and I are having this conversation now. That's why we behave the way we do. So we've got to use our minds and ask ourselves, what does the evidence point to as being true? I do not think the universe is religiously ambiguous. I think God has left more than enough evidence for any thinking person to believe in him. That's why anthropology shows us that around the world, every culture has some type of religion.
Yeah, atheism is the vast minority of a New Age belief.
Oh, yeah.
I love that Cliff brought up the idea of Jesus asking 290 questions or more than that in the Gospels. It is an intellectual faith. And on top of that, the Greek word for faith is pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S. And what that Greek word means is a confident trust in the evidence that Jesus Christ gave us. So this is not blind faith. Rather, we intellectually look at the evidence of the Gospels and look at the claims within and have an intellectual conversation or study about them, and we choose to put our faith in the evidence. It is not blind faith. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Be blessed.